Tonight we continue our look at an issue President Obama has identified as one of the most important for the remainder of his term. But there are a lot of misconceptions about income inequality and a lot of things you should know.
For the first time in decades, wages are rising at all income levels.
The question is whether we respond to the income inequality we see with policies that help lift people up or tear others down.
Income inequality, the gap between rich and poor, is an issue presidents have spoken about over the years, although none perhaps as emphatically as President Obama.
The defining issue of our time is how to keep that promise alive. No challenge is more urgent. No debate is more important. We can either settle for a country where a shrinking number of people do really well, while a growing number of Americans barely get by. Or we can restore an economy where everyone gets a fair shot, and everyone does their fair share, and everyone plays by the same set of rules.
Let's go back in time and look at where income inequality has stood in the U.S. over the years. Back in 1928, the rich, the top 1% of earners, received about a quarter of all pre-tax income. The bottom 90% of earners received just over half of it. Fast forward to the Great Depression and World War II. America experienced a time of economic change and development that dramatically reshaped U.S. income distribution. In 1944, under FDR, the rich weren't quite as rich. Meanwhile, the bottom 90% saw their income rise to a 67% share. Through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, decades of economic growth brought prosperity for all. Each economic group's income share remained fairly constant. Then came the late 70s under President Jimmy Carter. The top 1% saw their share begin to rise. The bottom 90% began to fall. Between then and now, the share of income gains captured by the top earners grew. The top 1% saw a 45% increase under President Clinton and 65% under President George W. Bush. That number has dramatically increased since President Obama's inauguration in 2009. By 2012, the top 1% was back to where they were decades ago, taking in about a quarter of our country's pre-tax income. Yet the bottom 90% of workers saw their share fall below 50% for the first time in history. Some analysts say this is because of the choices the president made in the early part of his first term.
Well, our system is predicated on presidential leadership, and the president has not been focused on either, poverty or unemployment. Early in his term, he was focused on health care, as we all know, and, then we had the election, and this just hasn't been, at the front burner.
I don't think you can lay the blame for that at the feet of Obama. I think that blame lies also with the U.S. Congress, who's made decisions about what they want to fund and how they want to focus on dealing with the deficits rather than focusing on getting us back to something close to full employment.
To better understand average real income in recent decades, take a look at this graph. At the bottom here, the blue line, we have the bottom 90% of earners earning an average real income of around $30,000 a year in 2012. That's our latest data. If you look at the equivalent of their earnings in 2012 dollars back to 1980, you can see these Americans have seen pretty much a straight line across the board. Now if you focus on the top 10% of earners, the red line below, they made over $250,000 a year in 2012, and at that income level, you begin to see a bit of a change here over the years. The green, the top 5%, took home more than $430,000 a year. And if you compare them with the red line below, you'll see the peaks and valleys around the same time. But the most interesting part of this, when you look at this, the purple line at the top 1% of earners that earned over $1.2 million a year on average in 2012, this purple line is where we see, as you see, the most dramatic fluctuation. The gap between rich and poor widens over time. And take a look at the post-recession time, a time when President Obama has been very outspoken about economic fairness. While our blue, green, and red lines remain fairly constant, incomes for the very richest Americans, the purple line below, has continued their steep climb. According to the work of Emmanuel Saez, a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, during the post-recession years of 2009 through 2012, the rich snagged a greater share of total income growth than they did during the boom years of 2002 to 2007 under President Bush. In other words, inequality has been more pronounced, not less.
Rich people have pulled away largely because the top 1% has been doing quite well, and disproportionately doing quite well under President Obama. Remember that the stock market has doubled in value since President Obama took office, and at least 80% of those gains have gone to the top 10% in the income distribution. All told, income inequality has tended to get worse under President Obama.